This is the Mondoweiss podcast. I'm Dave Reed. Last month, pro-Israel centrist George Latimer beat Representative Jamaal Bowman in the Democratic primary for New York's 16th district. The American Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, spent $15 million to help secure Latimer's victory, and now they have their sights set on Missouri's 1st district, where Representative Cori Bush is facing a primary challenge from prosecutor Wesley Bell. Bush advocated for Palestinian rights on the campaign trail in 2020, and she's been strong on the issue as a House member, making her a consistent target of Israel lobbying groups. Mondoweiss' U.S. correspondent Michael Arria spoke to JBP Action political director Beth on Cori Bush's record, Bell's politics, and how much AIPAC is spending on the race.
So before we get to the race, I wanted to start maybe a little bit about Cori Bush's record on the issue of Israel and Palestine, kind of, what she ran on regarding the issue originally when she was, vying for the House seat, and also like her record since she's gotten to Congress. Just kind of, if you could talk a little bit about why an organization like JBP Action is endorsing her.
Cori Bush has been one of the most consistent, strongest voices on the issue of Palestinian rights since she ran and got into Congress. And consistency has been really key in why we are so proud to be supporting her, why JBP Action is so proud to be endorsing her and supporting her campaign and standing alongside her. Certainly since October 7th and Israel's genocidal assault and attacks on Palestinians over the last 9 months have been underway, she has been consistently and loudly speaking out, but long before that as well. Congresswoman Bush has long been pushing for an end to the unconditional flow of U.S. military funds to the Israeli government. She has been speaking out for the rights of the Palestinian rights movement and activists, the right to engage in boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign. She has been speaking out about the Nakba. She really has been across the board strong on this issue. And I think one of the things that's really unique about the Congresswoman is that she comes to her positioning on this issue through her own experiences as an activist and as an organizer in St. Louis fighting for Black lives. And, she, of course, got her kind of really dove into this issue when she was protesting the murder of Mike Brown in Ferguson. And in those protests, she was standing alongside Palestinian activists and organizers and neighbors who were with her in the streets. And, now what has become kind of a very well-known story is that when police in Ferguson were shooting tear gas at Black activists and organizers and protesters, Palestinians in Gaza were tweeting about how to deal with the tear gas. And, through those moments of solidarity and speaking with her Palestinian neighbors who were showing up in solidarity in those protests, that was when she really started to learn about Palestine and about the Palestinian rights and liberation movement. And she has held on to that and really brought that local organizing and position of solidarity across marginalized and oppressed communities to her work in Congress and how she approaches this issue. And it really is quite unique. And so, of course, then during Israel's genocidal attacks over the last 9 months, she has been leading calls for a ceasefire. She has been leading calls to stop weapons and being unafraid to criticize her colleagues or other members of the Biden administration who are, amplifying and warmongering at great personal risk to herself. And so now we're in a situation where her principled values and stances on Palestine have led to a position where she is now being attacked by AIPAC. This race is going to be really critically important to protect not just her and her seat and keeping her voice in Congress, but also to send a message more broadly to other members of Congress that you can speak out for Palestinian rights like she has been doing since day one, and that movements will show up and protect your seat, and that you will stay in office and continue to be able to work.
So I want to get to the AIPAC spending in a minute, but before we talk about that, I wanted to talk about her primary opponent, is Wesley Bell, who's a St. Louis prosecuting attorney. In some of these situations that we've covered, pro-Israel groups kind of getting involved, trying to oust progressive members based on their stances on Israel. in some situations you have, opponents who are kind of true believers when it comes to this stuff. And it seems like in other situations, the issue's kind of thrust upon them via, these big donations from pro-Israel groups. So talk to me a little bit about Wesley Bell. Who is this person? How do they fit in? What is their politics? Where do they come from?
Wesley Bell is the county prosecutor, and he ran for that position on a platform of saying that he would be a progressive prosecutor, and he's now running against Congresswoman Bush, saying that he holds similar progressive values, but he is, quote, more of a pragmatist. That's kind of his angle on this. However, I think that what his career and his past and then how he's acting now really shows us is that, in fact, he's a political opportunist who is not operating in any sort of consistent, principled, progressive way. He disappointed the people who helped try to get him elected for prosecutor by not upholding many of the progressive values that he said he would be running on and enacting. And now what we're seeing from him is that he has basically taken a stance on Israel that is incredibly hawkish, incredibly warmongering, because it means that he gets AIPAC funding and he is attracting that kind of money into the race that he thinks can help him win. And for that matter, he is getting money directly from Republicans and Republican donors. And if you look back at his history, one thing that came out recently over the past couple of months is that while he claims to be a progressive and a progressive Democrat, he also at one point managed the campaign of someone who was an anti-abortion Republican. So it's very clear looking at Bell's record and history that he is not, in fact, consistent, that he is not operating from a place of genuine principles or progressive values, but is rather a political opportunist who's trying to basically go where he thinks the wind is and where he can win. And so right now, what we have in this race is a situation where you have a genuine progressive in Cori Bush who is being attacked by a fake progressive, Wesley Bell, who is getting GOP Republican dollars and AIPAC spending to try to oust her from Congress. And so there really is a lot at stake in this race because it's very clear that he is not actually going to be fighting for what the people of St. Louis want.
So let's talk about AIPAC. How extensively have they kind of jumped into this race, and kind of what's the role here in terms of the spending and maybe any other pro-Israel groups that you're aware of that are kind of also involved?
Yeah, absolutely. So AIPAC spending in this race has been huge. They are essentially trying to buy this seat. They recruited Wesley Bell and they have directly raised over $1.7 million for him, which is a massive amount of money to be raising for a House primary race. And AIPAC Super PAC, which is ironically called the United Democracy Project, is on track to set records for a Super PAC spending in Missouri ever. So far, their Super PAC UDP has already spent over $4 million attacking Cori Bush and supporting Bell. And that's on television, radio, digital, mail. They are full on smearing her in their attacks. And it's worth noting that they actually got involved in this race earlier than most Super PAC spending starts. They started about in week 10 of the race, which is, what can happen when you have absurd amounts of money at your disposal, like UDP does. They are, like I said, trying to buy this race by just flooding the airwaves with smear campaigns and lies about Cori Bush. And as has often been the case in how they operate, it is very much worth noting that none of their ads are about Israel. None of their ads are about what they claim their core issue is, right? AIPAC's mission is to solidify, continue, and increase U.S. support and military funding and unwavering support for the Israeli government and for the Netanyahu regime. That is their core mission as an organization. Yet what they are campaigning on has absolutely nothing to do with that. And the reason is that they know that their issues are not actually popular. And in fact, what Cori Bush is pushing for, which is a human rights and justice centered approach where the humanity of all people is what's centered, that's what's actually popular with voters. So again, what you have here is a situation where AIPAC's Super PAC is coming in and spending historic amounts of money to smear Congresswoman Bush and to support Wesley Bell without ever actually disclosing or talking about why they are doing this. And the overwhelming majority of that spending is also coming from Republican dollars, which are now meddling in a Democratic primary.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the decision to target Cori Bush, weeks after Jamaal Bowman lost his Democratic primary, George Latimer, where he was also targeted. But through this election cycle, we've also seen AIPAC, stay out of fights like the one against Summer Lee, which, they had spent a lot of money on her, obviously, in the previous election, decided to sit that one out. It seems like they're very conscious of branding and very conscious of optics. They like to put out these graphics. 100% of the candidates they've backed have won, even in some situations where they've, back channeled money to third party places and lost elections. Can you talk about the decision making in terms of, you looking at their strategic decisions in terms of which progressive candidates they decide to target and which ones they decide not to?
AIPAC really does not like to look vulnerable. And so where they decide to get involved is only where they think they see vulnerabilities, often on other issues that do not have to do with Palestine and Israel. So, they didn't go after Congresswoman Summer Lee because they didn't believe that she had vulnerabilities that they could exploit, and they didn't think that they could win, basically, in that race. I think that, like you just referenced, AIPAC really likes to be able to say that all their candidates win. And those numbers are kind of skewed based on where they decide to get involved, where their spending is. And so, in the Congressman Bowman's race, which very, very unfortunately, AIPAC's money successfully really had big influences in, and we lost Congressman Bowman as a representative in the coming Congress. In that race, Congressman Bowman had also been redistricted several times over, actually, and lost much of his base. And then when you throw into that AIPAC spent over $17 million, which is a historic amount of money, they essentially also bought that seat. And in Missouri, they feel that that their money can go very far, and that they can flood the airwaves and smear Congresswoman Bush, and that they believe she has enough vulnerabilities where they can buy that seat. I think that they're wrong. I think that they've made a miscalculation here, and that Congresswoman Cori Bush is in fact very popular in the district, and that movements are going to be standing up behind her and supporting her. And she has not been redistricted in the way that Congressman Bowman was. And I think that they're going to have a loss coming up in this race. But they really do, what AIPAC likes to do is pick members of Congress who are vulnerable for other reasons that have nothing to do with Palestine, spend overwhelming amounts of money, eye-popping sums of money that are honestly very anti-democratic in how they operate, to smear those candidates on every issue other than Israel and Palestine. And then if the candidate that they are attacking loses, they say that being pro-Israel is good politics and good policy, as though that's what the candidate won on, when in fact it had nothing to do with that. It had to do with their spending, and it had to do with the ways that they were smearing the candidate on other issues. So that's kind of how they've been operating in the past. I think they've made a miscalculation and a mistake here, and Congresswoman Bush is going to be reelected, and we'll be able to send a message that in fact it's being pro-Palestine and pro-Palestinian rights. That's good politics and good policy.
And finally, I want to take a step back and just talk a little bit about going into this election cycle. We saw these numbers that AIPAC was about to spend over $100 million. Obviously, a few years ago was when they developed UDP, the super PAC that you referenced, to start intervening directly in elections with big money. And I know on the flip side, we've seen, the existence of JBP Action is a testament to the fact that we've seen an increased presence on the Hill when it comes to organizations who fight for Palestinian rights. I'm just wondering if you could maybe reflect a little on how groups like JBP Action and Justice Democrats, if not now, others who have kind of taken on this fight, how do you kind of approach it when your opponents have so much in way of resources?
Right.
On the opposite side of that, how do you approach that?
It's a great question. I think, we will never be going dollar for dollar with AIPAC, because AIPAC money is GOP billionaire mega donor money. We are not trying to go dollar for dollar with them or toe for toe with them on spending. We have people. That is where our power lies. It's in our organizing. It's in our people power. And that's true across all the areas of how the Palestinian rights movement and broader progressive movements operate. That's true across the board, but it's certainly true in this fight against AIPAC. They are spending like they're scared. I think that that's really important to clarify here. The fact that they launched a super PAC that is now spending at historic rates is a sign that they feel that they can only win if they are buying these seats. And that's because they know that they're losing on the issues. They are losing in terms of the popularity of what they are trying to say. Overwhelmingly, Democratic voters are more and more leaning towards supporting Palestinian rights and demanding that we stop sending bombs and weapons and unconditional military funding to the Israeli government as it upholds apartheid and carries out genocide. That is the overwhelming trend in the base of the Democratic Party, and AIPAC is trying to hold on to a grip over the Democrats by spending in these overwhelming ways and with eye-popping historic sums of money. And so what we are trying to do is organize the mass people power that we have to fight back. And, I think that that's really important to say here is that we need to take this race seriously. As activists and as organizers, we cannot sit this out because AIPAC is spending and they could successfully win, but they only win if we sit this out. If we show up, if we organize, if we fight back, if we're phone banking, if we're making calls, if we're raising grassroots dollars, that's when we win. It's when we show up and we are organizing. It's when we sit back and don't volunteer and we don't get involved that AIPAC could take this. And so that's going to be the key here. It's our ability to mobilize our people that's going to make the difference. And that's how we can fight back against AIPAC and AIPAC spending. I think that it's important for all of us as movement organizers and activists to see this as one tactic, as one tool in our toolbox, right? As part of the fight for the broader Palestinian liberation movement, there is so much that is so important. BDS, organizing our community, protesting, civil disobedience, all of these tactics are so critical. And we also can't abandon the space where we are trying to build governing power by protecting the people in office who are working to bring our movement demands to that space. So that means we also need to understand showing up for Congresswoman Bush's campaign as part of that broader movement fight as well.
Well, thanks so much for chatting with us today. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much, Michael.
That's our show. Mondoweiss is a nonprofit publication with no paywalls. If you would like to support our work, please go to mondoweiss.net/donate. Please leave a rating and review to help other listeners find the show. Subscribe to one of our free email newsletters so you can stay up to date on events in Palestine and related politics here in the U.S. and around the world. Finally, if you have any more feedback, send me an email at dave@mondoweiss.net. Thanks for listening. We'll be back soon with a new episode.